Chapter 7 On the Lam. X drifted into the casino, plopped down at a slot machine, and started mechanically feeding in dollar bills. If Nazir was a terror suspect, there must be agents at every exit. Worse still, he also knew that agents must be glued to monitors in the security station, where images were being beamed back from cameras trained at every foot of the casino floor, offering multiple angles on every gambler. He couldn't sit there indefinitely. Suddenly aware that someone had sidled up beside him, X almost jumped out of his seat. "Cocktail, sir?" asked a smiling waitress, holding a tray of drinks. The strongest drink imaginable would seem in order under the circumstances. He nodded. "Scotch on the rocks." In the periphery of his vision, he saw men moving through the casino, methodically checking out aisle after aisle, like a pack of wolves sniffing out prey. It would only be a matter of minutes, or perhaps seconds. The inclinators were frozen, he noted. The lawmen had shut them down. The waitress was back with the drink in under a minute. X gulped it down, and, sadly, it did little to steady his nerves. Even heroin might not. A voice came over the loudspeaker, crackling and barely audible over the din of the one-armed bandits. "Tours are beginning of King Tut's tomb in 5 minutes. Hurrying to the lobby, X joined the tour group, which included a couple struggling to ride herd over 4 excited kids, a trio of middle-aged women, and 5 Japanese tourists. As they entered the dark series of chambers, X felt a momentary relief. The place was as cool, dark, and tranquil as, well, a tomb. He felt as if he had magically escaped to another place and time. In November 1922, the British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered beneath the Valley of the Kings the tomb of King Tut. The youthful male tour guide intoned in a reedy tenor as they clattered across the stone floor into the first chamber. Melodramatic pre-recorded music accompanied his spiel. He had to break through 4 doors to get to the burial chamber. In the first was the greatest collection of Egyptian antiquities ever discovered. This is a replica of the first chamber and many of the artifacts. As X's eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room emerged, including statues of strange animals and gods, many of them painted gold. On your left is a statue of the god Ptah. This golden vase is in the shape of an ibex, and beside it is an alabaster jar in the form of a lion, the guide was saying. Beyond this antechamber, breaking through another wall, the archaeologists found a smaller room filled with equally magnificent treasures. Finally, Carter broke through a 4th sealed door into the holiest of holies, the burial chamber of King Tut. With a dramatic gesture, the geeky youth flung open a heavy door. In the center of the 4th room, a huge yellow sarcophagus stood on a dais. Inside was a remarkably convincing replica of the anthropoid coffin X had seen a dozen times on covers of magazines like National Geographic. The lid of the coffin itself is carved in high relief, with an image of the dead king as the god Osiris, the guide went on. His arms, crossed on the chest, clutch the twin symbols of kingship, the scepter and the flail. The divine cobra of Lower Egypt and the vulture goddess of Upper Egypt rise from the king's forehead. Attached to the mummy were more than 100 small items placed in accordance with the famous Book of the Dead to ensure the king's safe passage into the afterlife. In the next room, we'll see replicas of some of those items. As they passed through the doorway into the next room, X was almost curious about what they'd see. Not a bad tour, really. He'd been very fond of field trips to museums in grade school, with the wondrous though fleeting escape they offered. X spied a quartet of agents entering from the far side of the chamber. He ducked behind a column and then doubled back, making his way quickly to the start of the exhibit. Well, hello. 2 more agents stood guarding the entrance, their backs to him. Just dandy. He turned again, hurried back into the faux tomb, and there he saw his one and only chance. With some effort, X pushed aside the lid of King Tut's coffin. Thankfully, it was made of some kind of styrofoam, not stone. To his relief, the designers of the exhibit had been insufficiently fixated on authenticity to include a real mummy. He climbed in and gingerly slid the lid back in place. As the darkness settled in around him, X's claustrophobia flared up. It felt as if he had been buried alive. "Is this thing airtight?" he wondered, panic rising. He lay there in silence, listening to the footsteps of the tour group retreat. How long was he going to have to stay here? Hours? Or perhaps not so long. He heard gruff male voices nearby. "Check out everything. I swear I saw him sneak in with a tour group." "Okay, Malloy." FBI agents might not be rocket scientists, but how long could it be before they thought of looking in the coffin? X had to act, and act quickly. The identity thief slipped the purloined cell phone out of his pocket and called the hotel's front desk. "Can you transfer me to security?" he whispered. When he got casino security, he asked to speak with the chief.
"Chief Wharton here."
"This is Agent Malloy." He was a gifted mimic, but he had only heard Malloy utter one sentence. "We've ascertained that the suspect has some kind of dirty bomb," he said. "We have to get everyone out right now."
"I can't authorize the evacuation," Chief Wharton said, aghast. "I'd need permission from the manager."
"Remember what happened on 9/11, when companies ordered employees back to their desks? Do you want something like that on your conscience? Order the evacuation. Now," X demanded sharply.
"All right."
X waited in darkness, listening to the footsteps of agents on the stone floor. 2 sets of footfalls approached the coffin. "Larry, give me a hand with this." "You gotta be kidding." "I'm serious. Remember the perp we caught hiding in a washing machine?" X was almost relieved to be caught. Anything to get out of this suffocating box. The lid began to move above him, and a shaft of light poured in. Then a voice boomed over the speaker.
"All guests and employees of the Giza Hotel and Casino, we ask that you please exit the building in a calm and orderly manner."
"What the heck?" said one of the agents. He heard their footsteps clattering as they dashed from the chamber. X climbed out of the coffin and hurried through the dark chamber and out to the lobby. He joined the throng of people flooding toward the exit. Despite the call for calm, most of the guests and casino workers were savvy enough to know this was an emergency, a fire at the least. X was shoulder to shoulder with topless showgirls, gamblers with drinks still in their hands, and a few guests still in their underwear. As X neared the door, he saw a pair of guards who looked as if they might have played professional football in their younger days. They were trying to check people as they passed through, but the crowd was shoving so hard it was impossible to see everyone's face. He was so certain he'd be nabbed he nearly shut his eyes again, but the crowd pushed him past the agents into the street. "Nobody else gets out!" he heard a voice shout. He could hear a howl of protest from inside the casino as the doors shut behind him. Chapter 8. The Den of Iniquity. Adopting what he hoped was an air of nonchalance, X boarded a moving sidewalk headed toward the monorail station. The Giza was one of 3 hotels connected by monorail service, and to the best of X's recollection from his quick glance at the brochure, there were trains arriving every 3 minutes. The sidewalk moved so slowly X was tempted to race-walk on it, but of course he didn't dare do anything but stand perfectly still and stare directly ahead, like a horse in blinders. The monorail station was just 50 feet away now. Yes, he thought. It was beginning to look as if he might actually make it out of this colossal shitstorm. but just outside the station he spied two dark-suited men talking discreetly into their lapels. "Oh, no," X moaned. He hadn't meant to say it aloud. A fellow beside him gave him a funny look. He plucked the cell phone out of his jacket pocket, accidentally dropped it, then knelt to pick it up, obscuring his face. As fellow pedestrians jostled by him, he stood, pivoted, and, stepping off the moving sidewalk, he began walking back in the direction from which he'd come.
"Hey!"
The voice behind him was deep and authoritative. X turned, beginning to raise his hands. Huh? There was no one there. Then he looked down to see a dwarf with enormous heart-shaped spectacles and an Uncle Sam top hat. The wee fellow handed him a flyer.
"Come check out the Pink Panther,"
the Lord of the Ring escapee said cheerfully in that incongruously deep voice.
2-for-1 drink specials.
The flyer bore the image of a curvaceous cartoon blonde bending to smooch the famed celluloid feline. X glanced around surreptitiously. Well, and he poured in a storm. Along the sidewalk, an FBI van crept, equipped with two portable millimeter-wave scanners, similar to the kind used at airports to screen passengers. The machines offered a view of the suspect fully nude, leaving nothing to the imagination. The two agents inside the unmarked white van ignored passing women, children, and old folks, concentrating on males with Al-Nazir's reported height of 5'8". The younger agent drew his partner's attention to the glowing image on his screen. "Look at what that guy with all the dreadlocks is packing. A weapon?" "Yeah, a Magnum. His Johnson's got to be 9 inches soft." The older agent sighed. "I'd sell my soul to be Jamaican for just one day." The other agent tilted his head. "Isn't it a little crooked, though?" At the temporary command center, Mark Norman, Jr., agent in charge of the manhunt, was fuming. Though just a hair over 5'6", the Chicago native had a booming voice that would put Nick Fury to shame. "How did we lose control of the subject in the first place?" he demanded. "Having to rely on a girl with a wire. Are we living in 1985? "We don't know, sir," said Agent Malloy, who sported a high red pompadour. Yes, he's the fellow from the casino bank. "We had enough cameras planted in that suite to cover the Super Bowl, including a pinhole over the bed, and 11 microphones. And he dry-cleaned the place. Managed to find them all?" "No, the signal was jammed. We still don't know how." "He had no backup?" Across the street, on the 24th floor in the Bloomberg building, we had a laser microphone directed at his window. This nifty surveillance device works by picking up sound vibrations at a distance. The mic beams an invisible infrared laser at the window pane, while a photo transistor picks up the reflection. The vibrations from the speaker's voice create tiny differences in the distance traveled by the light from second to second as it bounces back. These fluctuations are detected by an interferometer, and electronic hardware linked to an audio amplifier converts the signal back into sound. That sound, Norman knew from experience, would probably stink. "We got a conversation between Nazir and his bodyguards," Malloy was saying as he held up a digital player. "The idiots killed in the car chase?" "Yes, sir. We're still trying to ID them." "Well, get a translator in here." "It's in English." "So, they knew we were listening in." Malloy nodded and flipped a switch. Although the recording had been digitally enhanced by computer whizzes, it was difficult to make out the words, just as Norman had anticipated. The voices were so distorted and synthetic it might have been 3 Stephen Hawkings talking. "Where are you two spending your night off?" the first voice said. "We want to see Wayne Newton," replied a second voice. "Don't you know he's retired?" "That's so disappointing. The man is such a big legend." Maybe Celine Dion?" "Yes, That Titanic song still makes me sad, a third voice chimed in. Leonardo DiCaprio is such a good actor, the second voice said. I'm glad he's making a comeback. Normand and Malloy looked at each other for a moment. They're talking in code, obviously, said Normand. Agent Malloy nodded. Wayne Newton. That must be the chief, Abdul Gamal. Retired? That's dead. The chief is dead? Normand shook his head. No way. They must be using elliptical communication. Everything means the opposite. He's telling them the chief is alive. And who is Celine Dion? Dr. Zawari, maybe. His second in command. The Titanic could mean a big catastrophe. Major loss of life. Normand nodded grimly. A WMD. Or if it's the opposite, maybe it means something wonderful is going to happen. Normand frowned at this attempt at humor. A knock came at the office door. It's Agent Kingsmith. Come in. Agent Tracy Kingsmith, whose foray into undercover work as Stacy the masseuse had been a less than smashing success, came into the office bearing a printout. She now wore a gray pantsuit and had scrubbed off the makeup. She looked like a paragon of professionalism. You didn't have to change right away, Malloy said with a mischievous grin that made his freckled face resemble Howdy Doodies. Tracy gave him a we-are-not-amused glare that wiped the smile off his face. We have the facial recognition analysis, she said, handing Normand the printout. As soon as Ali Nazir had escaped the Pharaoh suite, the surveillance team had commandeered the hotel's cameras, and the incoming signal was processed live by facial recognition software. Such software, which organizes digital video footage into a searchable database, had been around for more than 10 years. As far back as 2001, police had used a program called FACEIT to scan the Super Bowl 35 crowd for known terrorists. It hadn't turned up any, but identified 19 poor saps with pending warrants who, sadly, didn't get to see the halftime show. He shaved the beard, Tracy told her boss, pointing to the close-up of X at the slot machine. That's why the program didn't identify him immediately. He would never have gotten out of the building otherwise. That was some fast work. Not a nick on him, marveled Agent Malloy. He ought to be doing Gillette commercials. Normand shoved the printout back into Tracy's hand. Distribute the picture. Get it to everyone. Not the media. Including the media, Normand snapped. Maybe Geraldo will have better luck than our people. The Pink Panther was the biggest gentlemen's club on the Strip, boasting 50 topless dancers. From the exterior, it looked as huge as a Walmart. Inside, marble stairs led to a semicircular front desk, where X paid the $25 cover charge and ducked into the inner sanctum through an ornate metal door. His nostrils were immediately assaulted by the dueling aromas of cigarettes and perfume. X hadn't set foot in a strip club in years. He did not frequent such establishments where women used their charms to empty the wallets of suckers with flattery and unspoken promises of intimacy. Strippers were con artists, to his way of thinking, and he considered himself a purveyor, not a consumer, of flim-flammery. However, for someone attempting to pull a disappearing act, the Pink Panther was all you could hope for. The establishment was jam-packed, dark and noisy, with rock music alternating with hip-hop blasting over man-sized speakers. On 6 stages, curvaceous cuties swung on poles and enthusiastically shook their tails. These were Venuses of all ethnicities, heights, sizes, natural boobs or synthetic, a beauty to suit whatever one's favorite flavor. Flashing neon lights poured down on the stages, 3 bars and scores of tiny drink tables covered with dainty pink tablecloths. X gazed out over an ocean of bare-breasted temptresses writhing in the laps of patrons, while dozens of other vixens, clad in lingerie, roamed like famished sharks in search of cash-laden prey. As he entered the club, he passed a drunken man being led out by 3 buddies in what X immediately recognized as the aftermath of a raucous bachelor party. X deliberately bumped into the foursome and slipped the Tucson cop's cell phone into the besotted bridegroom's pocket. It was only a matter of time before the identity thief's pursuers used it to track him down. X was by no means an expert on police manhunts, but he knew that much from the movies. He sank into a stool at the bar and ordered an $8 Heineken. Like his alter ego, the notorious Al-Nazir, X was a teetotaler. Not for religious reasons. Although raised a Catholic, X hadn't seen the inside of a church in more than a decade. It was simply that he preferred to be in control at all times. So he nursed his greenie, as beer connoisseurs call the brand, and consumed a modest sip every few moments. On a TV over the nearest bar, CNN was reporting a late-breaking story. The sound was either muted or completely overwhelmed by the eardrum-busting music, but the words were closed-captioned at the bottom of the screen. A spokesman for the Department of Homeland Security has announced that it is close to capturing Al-Nazir, described as the number 2 man in the Jihadist Brotherhood, one of the world's most dangerous terrorist organizations. His own face, apparently lifted from a casino surveillance camera, filled the screen, and X winced. Fortunately, none of his fellow patrons were paying much attention to the TV. All eyes were fixed on a comely dancer on stage as she spun around a pole upside down with the grace of an Olympic gymnast. He read on. For years, the Kuwaiti national posed as an international playboy, authorities allege, while secretly pursuing a double life as a terrorist leader. He allegedly funded a string of audacious attacks, such as the raid on the Afghan army base in Kandahar, as well as last year's bombing of Mount Rushmore, which, as we all know, resulted in the destruction of Teddy Roosevelt's nose. A reward of $5 million is being offered for information leading to his capture. This just gets better and better, X thought grimly. Onto the stage strutted a pale dancer with silicone breasts and a waist-long head of curly red hair that looked suspiciously like a wig. Nature had endowed her with the most perfect ass X had ever beheld, a pair of succulent ripe melons. It appeared to have a life of its own from the way it moved left, right, up and down to the thumping beat. The redhead planted her legs wide apart, bent over at the waist, and stuck her magnificent milk-white rear end in the air, then gleefully smacked it. Looking backward between her legs, she caught him gawking, and winked. X turned away in embarrassment. On CNN, the anchor continued. In a related story, Abdul Gamal, leader of the Warriors of Allah terror network, and known as the Chief, identified by the director of the CIA as Osama bin Laden's puppeteer, has released a new video. In it, he defends his declaration of a fatwa, a death warrant against all Americans. A bearded man, who surprisingly resembled an older version of Sean Connery in his dubious performance as an Arab desert warrior, Scottish brogue and all, in The Wind and the Lion, appeared on the screen. Beneath his stern visage, words crawled, translating his Arabic. America makes no distinction between soldiers and civilians. The only nation to use an atomic bomb was the U.S., which inflicted a holocaust on the innocent people of Hiroshima. They are the true terrorists. So, no, we will not limit our targets. The fatwa includes all those who helped the Jewish occupiers of Palestine and the killers of Muslims. X shook his head. You belong in a loony bin, old fellow, he thought. As the song ended, X turned to watch the red-haired dancer put her top back on, then gingerly walked down from the stage in precariously high heels. As he spun around on the bar stool, he spotted 3 agents entering the club. They attempted to look casual, but their stern demeanor and the fact that they were peering into the dark recesses of the bar instead of the stages where half-naked girls were strutting their stuff made it easy for X to peg them as law enforcement. And of course he couldn't help noticing that all three were sporting sunglasses, rather peculiar given the darkness of the establishment. They were oddly thick, like goggles, and it occurred to X that they might be some kind of new streamlined night vision lenses. He had to hide, fast. X reached up and tucked a $5 tip into the passing redhead's G-string. She grinned broadly. $20 for a table dance, $30 for a lap. It sounded a bit steep, but X was inexperienced in such matters, and furthermore didn't really have the time to negotiate. A lap. Good choice. We're going to have some fun. X watched her flaming hair bounce as she guided him to a purple leather chair and pushed him gently into it. The girl unfastened her bra and straddled him, her double D's wobbling impressively in front of him. Her flesh was dotted with freckles, he noted upon closer inspection. Maybe she was a genuine redhead. Out of the corner of his eyes, X could see the first of the trio approaching, and presumed that his own face was just as visible. With infrared night vision goggles, his features would probably be distinct. He had to get the girl closer to him, to hide completely. "What's your name?" he asked, as casually as he could. The girl leaned in to whisper into his ear. Her erect nipples grazed his chest, and his face vanished into her flowing orange hair. "Party. What's yours?" You had to hand it to her. The moniker was something of a novelty. "Steve." "Where do you hail from, Steve?" "South Carolina," he replied, having already adopted the appropriate drawl. "You?" "Wisconsin." This time, at least, the accent matched the purported place of origin. Peeking through the girl's hair, he could see the agents moving through the crowd, discreetly probing the darkened bar with tiny flashlights. Every time Party started to lean away from him, presumably to give him a better view of her silicone-enhanced breasts, X would renew the conversation, luring her in closer. "Have you been dancing long?" 3 years. I quit for a few months when I found Jesus and did some waitressing, but this place is in my blood." "Sure it pays better." "So true. Speaking of a whole lot of loot, did you hear about that huge reward they're offering for that motherfucker?" "Beg pardon?"
"That raghead terrorist who's loose in Vegas."
"Oh, yeah. Saw something about that on TV," he said weakly.
"With that money, wow, I could produce a movie and star in it," she said, a dreamy look in her eyes. "You know, like Drew Barrymore."
He nodded. "Yes, I could see you as maybe one of those teachers who turns an inner-city school around."
"Wow, well, you're like reading my mind."
Then, growing thoughtful, she added,
"But honestly, I would turn that guy in even if there was no reward. My uncle was killed in Afghanistan. We all have to do our part. I would personally cut off that creep's balls if I had the chance."
"Your patriotism is truly admirable," X remarked. On the TV screen, the words, "This just in," appeared under a computer-generated image of X, without a beard. The redhead expanded on her point.
"I don't mean with scissors. I mean with garden shears. No, a bolt cutter."
"Outstanding," X whispered, turning paler by the minute. The song, Bad Influence by Pink, abruptly ended.
"Want another?"
Party asked. "You bet." X dug into the policeman's wallet for another 20. The redhead swiveled around in his lap so that her pert round buttocks were perched on his groin. The position, fortunately, put the TV out of her line of sight, but his face was exposed again. X could see the broad-shouldered, square-jawed Agent No. 2 just feet away. To his alarm, the fugitive saw that the lawman was turning in his direction. X leaned forward and kissed the exotic dancer between the shoulder blades so that his face disappeared from the agent's view.
"You're so sweet,"
she giggled.
I love your perfume," he whispered with all the enthusiasm he could muster. She giggled again, and a raunchy rap tune by 50 Cent poured out of the speakers. She began to gyrate her thong-clad rump vigorously in his lap. Despite himself, he was swiftly growing hard for the second time that day. He disliked the feeling of losing control over his own body. He tried to fight it off, but resistance was futile, as the Borg liked to say. "Whoa, you got a big dick for a guy with such small hands," Party cooed appreciatively. "Thanks, I think," he whispered in her ear, keeping his face nestled in that red mane. "You've got a really," he groped for the appropriate adjective, "impressive little caboose on you." "Oh, not so little," she giggled, "not with all the ice cream I eat." At the command center, Norman stood in a sprawling room surrounded by walls of giant video monitors with incoming data and images flashing upon the screen from all 360 degrees. "I'm getting a headache," he groaned. "Who designed this display? I swear to God I'm going to have an epileptic fit in a minute." "The IT people based it on the Bourne movies," said an aide, manning one of the 12 consoles. "Remind me to ask our friends at the CIA to terminate that producer." Tracy Kingsmith pointed to one of the giant screens, filled by the face of a giant, grinning Asian man. "We're getting human and or electronic intel from every building and street within a 2-mile perimeter. That's coming in from a strip club a half-mile from the hotel. We commandeered the club's surveillance cameras, and the feed is being digitally enhanced and run through the facial recognition program." Male faces, some leering, some blank, some with eyes fluttering in passion, flashed on and off the screen. A nearby screen displayed a feed from 3 mini-cameras built into the pen lights borne by the 3 agents on site, and also run through the automated video analysis software. The video was much shakier and more indistinct as the cameras probed the dark recesses of the club. Murky and somewhat disturbing images of breasts, thongs, and dollar bills merged and vanished into the gloom. "Do we have live mics in there?" Normand asked. "Coming from the agent's communicators," Tracy replied. "The system is searching for keywords now." The program analyzed complex sounds by using advanced psychoacoustic modeling, the science behind how humans distinguish and understand the meaning of sound. Cutting through levels of ambient noise, it would not only pick out key words like bomb or Allah, but even subtle vocal changes that suggested anger or fear. An agent wearing headphones yanked them off excitedly and pointed to the computer monitor at his station. "Mr. Normand, look!" On the screen, the phrase, "has great artillery," was flashing in big white letters. Normand sighed. "That's 50s slang. It means boobs. The guy must be 80. 3 cheers for Viagra," said Malloy, coming up behind the boss. "We've identified the cell phone Azir used to contact New York. We'll have the point of origin pinpointed within 4 minutes. Now that's more like it. Any word on the New York cell? A team raided it 12 minutes ago. Just missed them." Normand buried his face in his hand. "I guess I picked the wrong week to quit cocaine." When he removed his hand, he saw that Tracy was staring at him. "It's from Airplane?" he assured her. "Yes, I know. I'm just surprised that—" "Never mind, sir." In the bowels of the Pink Panther, Party was squirming to the thumping beat. "Damn," she moaned. "It feels like a broomstick back there. Hey, are you going commando, Steve?" X remembered that he indeed hadn't had time to don any underwear and grunted in the affirmative. She giggled again. "Naughty, naughty." Unexpectedly, Party bent forward at the waist, arching backward into him. Under other circumstances, X would have no objection, but now his face was exposed again, and he observed with some dismay Agent Number 3 was approaching. X knew from the prominently displayed warning sign at the entrance that touching a dancer with his hands was a no-no, but risking a screech was necessary. He gently touched Party's arms and pulled her back until her shoulder blades mashed against his chest. He buried his face into her mass of curly hair so deep he could smell shampoo. So it wasn't a wig. Through the red locks, X could see first the pants leg and then the whole body of the third agent. The giant of a man, who looked as if he could easily hurl X through a plate-glass window, stood stock still, slowly turning his head to survey the crowd. Meanwhile, the redhead was enthusiastically clenching her buns together. "You're making me so goddamn horny," she claimed. "I'm glad you enjoy your work," he gasped. "Seriously, you're exactly my type." He wondered what type that was. A full wallet? Out of the corner of his eye, X saw the third agent striding straight at him. The big man was no more than 4 feet away when he abruptly stopped, put his finger to his earpiece, and nodded. He spoke into his lapel, and then, much to the identity thief's relief, he and his fellow agents retreated from the club as stealthily as they'd entered it. 9 blocks away, the taxi carrying the bachelor party quartet was being pulled over and surrounded by dozens of lawmen. The 4 occupants howled in drunken protest as they were dragged out and tossed to the ground. One of the agents roughly frisked the groom-to-be and arose, brandishing the stolen cell phone. "Where did he just come from?" the agent demanded, rolling the guy over and shoving the muzzle of his shotgun up to the guy's nostrils. The terrified bridegroom looked at him blankly for a moment, then sputtered, "The Pink Panther." The agent barked into a walkie-talkie. "Units 5 and 6, get back to the club immediately. I repeat, get back to the club." The car bearing the agents from the club, who were speeding toward the scene and had traveled 4 blocks, made a screeching U-turn. Meanwhile, the dancer bounced up and down on X with gusto, like a teeny bopper testing out a new pogo stick. X was biting his lower lip and fighting back the urge to climax. Fortuitously, at that moment the song wound down, and the redhead looked over her shoulder expectantly. "Another dance?" she murmured. X had held $100 in reserve. "I want you to do something for me," he whispered. "If you want any extras, you need to take me into a VIP room," she said with a lascivious grin. "Oh, Steve, baby, I'm really going to rock your world."
What exactly comprised an extra, X would never know.
He waved the Ben Franklin in front of her greedy, lime-green eyes. "Is there another way out of here?" he asked. She hesitated, but the easy money was irresistible, and she snatched it from his fingers. "Sometimes a girl will get stalked by one of the ATMs. You know, some loser who blows all his money on you. No offense, man. None taken. And who falls in love and wants to date you. There's a back entrance in the dressing room so we can sneak out without getting hassled." Before surrendering his last C-note, leaving the stolen wallet empty, he whispered, "And there's one more thing." 2 minutes later, just as the agents burst into the club, Party bolted to her feet and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Raid!" Pandemonium erupted in the den of iniquity, with panicked half-naked girls darting in all directions like cockroaches surprised by kitchen light. Plastered customers stumbled to their feet, knocking over chairs. Perhaps few of them knew what a raid might constitute in the post-burlesque show era, but obviously it couldn't be a good thing. X had already snuck into the dressing room, where a skinny blonde sat with a pair of jeans around her ankles, attempting to pull them off. She hadn't applied her makeup yet, and had the despondent demeanor of a teenage runaway. "What the hell are you doing in here?" the girl demanded, covering her bra-clad bosom with surprising modesty and showing a mouthful of braces. "You're not allowed back here, dude." "All hell's broken loose out there," he informed her. "The place is crawling with cops. I don't know about you, but I'm getting the hell out of here." The girl cocked her head and listened to the shouts emanating from the club, then hurriedly yanked up her jeans and began buttoning them. Maybe she was 16, maybe 17. There was no doubt she was underage. X charged past the dancer, flung open the door, and slipped out. He looked left and right, and then, resisting the urge to run,
hurried down the narrow alleyway. In about 30 seconds, he knew, a dozen scantily clad babes were about to spill out of the secret exit. That might certainly tend to draw attention to the egress. As he burned the corner, he spied a roadblock up ahead. At least 15 agents, some in suits and others in flak jackets, were sprinting full throttle in the direction of the club. Oh, darn it all, X thought, ducking back. There was a truck parked next to a dingy pawn shop. X dropped to his belly and rolled underneath it. He could hear the clippity-clop of heavy government-issued brogans headed his way. Well, end of the road, X thought. He'd had a nice run of it, but they'd ferret him out in short order. Then he noticed it, a manhole cover. It would be only a matter of seconds before the agents reached the corner. X lurched for the manhole cover. It was heavy as lead, but an adrenaline rush gave him the strength to pry it off. He descended into the sewer and hauled the cover back over his head. The fumes, so potent they were almost visible, were overpowering. X nearly passed out on the way down the ladder, but to retreat would mean a prison cell, if not a bullet in the brain. So he pressed on, deeper and deeper into the abyss. His claustrophobia kicked in as he climbed, rung after rung, down the narrow shaft into Stygian darkness. He was perspiring profusely, unusual for a man of whom his colleagues often joked. He's not human enough to sweat. Finally he splashed down into a waist-deep pool of fetid, bacteria-laden wastewater. God knows what diseases I'm going to pick up, thought X, who was normally the type to wash his hands 8 to 10 times a day.